There is a moment, and most of us have had it, when you are surrounded by 1,000 people and you have never been more alone in your life. This is a story about that moment. His name was Daniel Whitaker. 47 years old. Founder of one of the most recognized private development firms in America. A man whose decisions moved millions of dollars and shaped entire skylines. A man who had spent 20 years building an empire, and that morning, discovered that the man he trusted most had quietly been burning it down. His company was bleeding. His reputation was under attack in the press. His lawyers were calling him every 6 minutes. And Daniel Whitaker, the man who always had a plan, sat in Gate C-17 of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, missed his flight on purpose, and decided he had nothing left to say to anyone. He was wrong. And then she asked him 4 words. "Can I sit here?" He said no. She sat down anyway. And what happened in the next 48 hours, because of what that little girl said, because of what she built, and because of the one question she asked that no billionaire had ever dared ask him, would expose a 12-year conspiracy, bring down a man of untouchable wealth, and give a voice to someone who had been silenced long before Daniel Whitaker ever knew his name. Stay with me. Because this story doesn't start at the airport. It starts years before that, with a man who believed that if you built something powerful enough, nothing could ever take it from you. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was Daniel Whitaker, really? Not the version on the magazine covers. Not the version in the Forbes profiles, with the carefully chosen words about discipline and vision and building things that last. The real Daniel Whitaker. The one who drove to the airport that morning with a phone full of missed calls and a chest full of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Because here is what the headlines didn't tell you. Someone had set him up. Not with a gun. Not with a theft. With something far more elegant and far more dangerous, a single sentence, buried in Appendix C of a 200-page infrastructure contract, that had been quietly altered in the final revision. Changed after approval. Changed by someone who had been smiling across boardroom tables for 3 years. Someone Daniel had called a partner. And somewhere deeper, much deeper, beneath the failing contract and the screaming headlines and the board members already covering their tracks, there was a name no one was saying out loud. A man named Ethan Cole. 34 years old. Risk analyst. Former Army Corps of Engineers consultant. A man who had seen the same thing Daniel was only now discovering, and had tried to stop it. And then he died. 3 questions will follow Daniel Whitaker through this story. Who buried Ethan Cole? How does a little girl who can barely read know something that every lawyer in Los Angeles missed? And what does it take, exactly what does it take, for a man who has everything to finally tell the truth? Keep watching. Every answer is coming. But first, you need to understand the man that Daniel Whitaker had become before any of this happened. Daniel Whitaker did not grow up with money. He grew up with hunger, not the kind that puts you in the hospital, but the quieter kind. The kind that watches other people's fathers drive nicer cars, and decides, very early, that it will never feel that way again. His mother worked nights. His father left when Daniel was 9. There was an older sister named Emily who made sandcastles on the beach one summer and told him, with complete seriousness, that every castle needed a door, so people could come back home. He remembered that more than he let on. By 29, he had built his first company from what people politely called nothing, and what Daniel privately called rage with a spreadsheet. By 35, Whitaker Ventures had broken into 8 figures. By 42, it was reshaping coastlines. Building mixed-use developments, affordable housing partnerships, waterfront revitalization projects that created actual neighborhoods where there had been vacant lots. He was not naive about money. But he genuinely believed, that money could build things that mattered. And then Victor Lang walked into his life. Victor was everything Daniel had worked to become: polished, connected, calm. He spoke the language of measured growth and disciplined ambition. He had the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself, which is the most dangerous kind there is. Daniel trusted him. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was something Daniel could only see looking back. He had spent 20 years mastering expansion while leaving softer things underdeveloped. Discernment. Humility. The ability to see danger before it put on a silk tie and sat across the table smiling. By the morning he found himself in Atlanta's airport, the morning that changed everything, Daniel Whitaker had built one of the most successful firms in American real estate development. He had hundreds of employees who depended on him. He had investors who trusted him. He had a company worth fighting for. And he had no idea how to ask for help. He had missed his flight deliberately. He told himself he needed to think. But the truth he couldn't quite face yet, was simpler and older than strategy. He was exhausted. Not just from the crisis. From years of being the man in the room who was supposed to have the answer. From a life that had grown so large and so fast that somewhere along the way, it had stopped belonging to him and started belonging to everyone who needed him to be okay. His phone had 47 missed calls. He turned it face down on the seat beside him. He was not going to be okay today. He knew that. What he did not know, what he could not have possibly predicted, was that help was already on its way. It was 6 years old. It was carrying a red plastic bucket. And it had absolutely no idea that the man sitting alone on that airport bench was worth $300 million, was fighting the largest legal battle of his career, and desperately, privately, needed someone to simply sit beside him. Her name was Amara. And she was about to teach a lonely millionaire something that 20 years of building empires had somehow never managed to teach him. "Can I sit here with you for a while?" Daniel Whitaker turned his head slowly. A little girl stood a few feet away. Bright yellow dress. Red plastic bucket in both hands, full of things she'd clearly been collecting, little airport shop trinkets, a coin, what looked like a smooth stone, a folded napkin. 6 years old, maybe. Round face, serious eyes, the kind of deliberate stillness that children only have when they've made up their mind about something. Daniel looked around for a parent. He saw a woman, calm, watchful, near the gate across the concourse. She wasn't running over. She was letting this happen. He looked back at the girl. "I think I'd like to be by myself for a little while," he said, as gently as he could. "I just need some quiet time. But thank you for asking." The girl nodded. Politely. The way children nod when they've heard you, understood you, and decided to proceed anyway. She sat down beside him. Daniel looked sideways at her. "You heard what I said, right?" "I did," she replied. She swung her feet lightly. Her shoes didn't quite reach the floor. "My grandma says," she began thoughtfully, "that when someone feels really sad, it helps if they're not alone." Daniel exhaled quietly. He said nothing. "Sometimes," she continued, "having one person sit with you makes the empty feeling smaller." "I appreciate that," Daniel said. "But I'm not very good company today." She looked at him with calm, unsentimental seriousness. "That's okay. You still look like someone who shouldn't sit alone." He didn't answer. The girl reached into her bucket and slowly poured its contents onto the empty seat beside her. Coins. A smooth stone. A tiny plastic keychain airplane. A folded piece of paper. She began arranging them carefully, with the focused gravity of an architect. "What are you making?" Daniel asked, before he could stop himself. She didn't look up. "A house." "For who?" She considered the question. "For the airport." He raised an eyebrow. "The airport has a house." She shook her head. "Not this part. This part is lonely." Something tugged unexpectedly at his chest. She pressed the folded paper against the row of coins like a wall. Then she looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel hesitated. "What?" "Why are you sad?" He looked at the windows. At the tarmac. At the planes that had somewhere to be. "That's a long story," he said. "You can tell me. You're a little young to understand all of it." She considered that. Nodded once. "That's probably true. Then, but I can still listen." He looked at her again. She spoke quietly, like someone who had heard important things and remembered them. "My grandma says when people talk about the sad things in their hearts, the sadness gets lighter." "Lighter?" Daniel asked. "Like when you take heavy stuff out of your backpack." She tilted her head. "The bag is the same. But you can breathe." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a thought crossed his mind. He turned toward her. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded immediately. "Sure. Why do you want to comfort a stranger? You don't even know who I am." The girl looked at him carefully. The way a child looks at something they are trying to understand, not with their brain, but with something older. Then she shrugged, the honest, undefended shrug that only children and very wise people ever manage. "I know you're sad," she said. "That's enough. My grandma says when someone is hurting, it doesn't matter if they're a stranger." She smoothed the folded paper wall with her finger. "Sometimes strangers need kindness the most." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, exactly. Recognition. He left his phone face down on the seat. They sat together for 20 minutes. He learned her name was Amara. She was 6 3/4, which she specified was different from just 6. She was traveling with her grandmother, Nadia, to see her uncle in Boston. She had collected the items in her bucket at different airports on other trips. She and her grandmother traveled often. Each thing meant something. "The stone is from Dallas," she said. "It was near the water fountain. I thought it looked lonely." Daniel almost smiled. She asked him, very seriously, if he had a stone. He said he did not currently have a stone. She frowned at this. Like it was a practical problem to be solved. She dug in the bucket and handed him the smoothest coin. "Here. It can be yours for now." He took it. He didn't know why. He just did. And then Amara, who had been quietly watching him since he first said he wanted to be alone, said something she had been working up to. She said it the way children say things they know are true but aren't sure adults will accept. "You have to tell the truth," she said. "Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because mean people only stay powerful when good people stay quiet." Daniel went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "My grandma says it." Amara looked at him earnestly. "She says it a lot, actually. About lots of things." A pause. "She's usually right." His phone buzzed again. And this time, for the first time in 4 hours, he picked it up. He looked at the screen. His lawyer. His CFO. A board member. His head of investor relations. He looked at Amara, who had gone back to arranging her collection. "I have to make a call," he said. She nodded agreeably. "I know." He was about to walk away. But he stopped. He reached into his pocket and set something on the seat beside Amara's collection. A business card. She looked at it. Looked up at him. "In case your grandmother ever needs anything," he said. From a stranger. Amara picked up the card, looked at it with great seriousness, and placed it carefully in the bucket. "I'll tell her," she said. "She'll like that." Daniel walked away down the concourse. His stride was different. Purposeful. The way a man walks when he stopped running from something and started moving toward it. He answered the call. "Robert," he said. His lawyer didn't bother with hello. "Where the hell have you been?" "At the airport," Daniel said. "I needed to think." There was a short silence. "And did you?" Daniel's hand closed in his pocket around the coin Amara had given him. "Yes," he said. "I think I finally did." Back at gate C-17, Amara's grandmother Nadia watched her granddaughter put the business card carefully back in the bucket. She looked up, down the concourse where Daniel had disappeared. A small, knowing smile. She had seen this before. Her granddaughter had a habit of finding people who needed to be found. If this story already has you feeling something, pause for a second and drop a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and type, "I'm still here," so we know you're with us. The most important part of this story is still ahead. By the time Daniel Whitaker reached the Whitaker Ventures Tower in Century City, the city had shifted into night. He had spent the flight from Atlanta on the phone. 3 calls to Robert Hale, his lawyer of 15 years. 1 call to Linda Marquez, his CFO, whose voice told him everything before she said a single word. 2 calls he let go to voicemail, from a board member who, Robert quietly informed him, had already been in contact with Victor Lang's people. The building was all steel, glass, and immaculate control. Normally it made Daniel feel powerful. Tonight it looked like a machine waiting to judge him. He had always found that part exhausting, the way rooms reorganized themselves when he walked in. Not because he demanded it. Just because they always had. Robert was waiting outside the conference room. Tie loosened. Reading glasses low on his nose. One hand around a paper cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. You look terrible, Robert said. Nice to see you too. You smell like an airplane. That would be because I was on one. Inside, the atmosphere was worse than expected. 3 members of his executive team sat around the long walnut table. Linda Marquez, his CFO, fierce and precise, a woman who had worked 80-hour weeks for him for 11 years and missed more family dinners than any person should. Sam Bennett, his head of investor relations, smooth under pressure, though sweat was gathering at his temples now. And Marcus Yee, his head of legal compliance, who Daniel had never seen pale before and who was now, undeniably, pale. Red numbers everywhere. Loss projections. Exposure charts. Headlines forming in real time on the right-hand screen. Daniel set both hands on the table. How bad? He asked. Linda answered first. If Lang Capital forces the current interpretation of the liability clause, we absorb almost the entire infrastructure overrun. Immediate losses in the 9 figures. Potentially more if creditors decide we concealed material risk. We didn't conceal anything. That won't stop them from saying it. Sam leaned forward. The market won't wait for nuance. There's already chatter online that Whitaker got greedy. If we don't control the narrative before morning, Victor will. Daniel turned to Robert. Show me. Robert tapped a key on his tablet. One of the wall screens shifted to a marked-up contract, Section 14. Revised risk allocation language. It was inserted in the final round, Robert said, and disguised as a harmonizing amendment tied to municipal compliance. Your outside review team compared it to the earlier draft but didn't flag the cross-reference buried in Appendix C. Linda spoke through clenched teeth. Because Appendix C was moved. Robert nodded. Exactly. On purpose. Daniel stared at it. The language was beautiful in the worst possible way. Smooth, technical, crafted to be missed by anyone not specifically hunting for a knife. Victor had not won by force. He had won by patience. Daniel felt the old anger rising. But now it was clearer. Colder. More useful. Who else has seen this? He asked. Just us, Robert said. And I'd like to keep it that way until we decide whether we're negotiating, litigating, or preparing for war. Sam muttered, it's already war. Daniel looked around the table. At Linda, who had given him years. At Sam, who was sweating through his shirt but hadn't gone home. At Robert, who had once told him the most dangerous moment in any empire was when the man at the top started believing he couldn't be touched. Maybe this was that moment. Daniel leaned back slowly. Victor wants panic, he said. He wants us loud, reactive, divided, and scared enough to accept his version of rescue. Linda nodded. That's right. So we don't give him that. Sam frowned. We still need a statement. You'll get one. Daniel looked at the contract. But not tonight. Tonight we gather facts. Robert studied him. His voice was careful. Something changed today. Daniel looked at the contract again. And saw, for a brief and impossible second, a 6-year-old girl pressing a folded piece of paper into a coin wall and saying, mean people only stay powerful when good people stay quiet. He almost smiled. What changed, he said quietly, is that I remembered panic doesn't build anything. It only tears down what's already standing. He gave them their assignments. Linda would freeze all optional transfers tied to the redevelopment project. Sam would draft a holding statement, nothing defensive, nothing emotional. For release at 6 a.m. Robert would pull every communication between Lang Capital and their legal review team. He wanted a timeline of every version of the contract. He wanted to know who touched Appendix C. He wanted to know if Victor had made similar moves in any prior developments. And no anonymous quotes to press, Daniel said. Nobody leaks. Nobody speculates. The room settled. Not calm, steadier. Direction had a way of doing that. Robert came to stand beside him at the window. You really did spend 4 hours in an airport, he said. I really did. And you seem almost, okay. Daniel glanced at him. I met someone. Robert raised an eyebrow. A 6-year-old girl. She told me the sadness gets lighter when you talk about it. And that sometimes strangers need kindness the most. Daniel looked back at the city. And that mean people only stay powerful when good people stay quiet. Robert was silent for a long beat. Smart kid. She gave me a coin from her collection. Robert stared at him. A coin. She said it could be mine for now. Another silence. Daniel, Robert said carefully. You are in the middle of the largest legal crisis of your career. You have 47 missed calls, a collapsing development contract, a predator restructuring the public narrative as we speak, and you are telling me a 6-year-old gave you a coin in an airport and it changed your outlook. Daniel pulled it from his pocket. Looked at it. Put it back. Yes, he said. Robert considered this. All right, he said finally. Then let's go win. What they found that night, in the hours between midnight and dawn, was worse than they had imagined. And more useful. 3 prior projects. Different partners. Similar clause structures. Each time, the liability had been quietly shifted to the other side in the final round, disguised as routine amendments. And at the bottom of the oldest file, a name. Ethan Cole. 34 years old. Risk analyst. Former Army Corps of Engineers consultant. Hired 6 months before construction on the Phoenix Harbor project escalated. According to internal records, Ethan Cole had raised written concerns about structural shortcuts, contractor substitutions, and undocumented transfers tied to shoreline reinforcement. 2 weeks after raising those concerns, he had requested a private meeting with someone inside Lang Capital's oversight arm. The meeting had been received and acknowledged. By Victor Lang himself. 3 days later, Ethan Cole was dead. Single car accident outside Mesa. 11:40 p.m. driver fatigue suspected. Employment status, closed. Matter resolved. Daniel read those 2 words twice. Then he set the paper down, very carefully, like something that might break. Robert, he said quietly. This isn't just a contract dispute anymore. Robert said nothing. He didn't need to. We need to find out who he was, Daniel said. Not as evidence. As a person. We need to find out who he left behind. Robert looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened a new search window. I'll start now, he said. And somewhere in Atlanta, in a quiet airport terminal that was emptying for the night, a little girl named Amara was asleep in a departure lounge chair with her head on her grandmother's shoulder, her red plastic bucket in her lap, and no idea at all that the sad man she had sat beside that afternoon had just started a fight that would change far more than his company. She had simply done what her grandmother taught her to do. She had sat beside someone who was hurting. And she had stayed. Her name was Rachel Levin. 39 years old. Part-time writing instructor at a community education program near Santa Monica College. Dark hair. Quiet. The kind of face that grief sometimes leaves behind, not broken, but permanently sharpened around the eyes. She had been Ethan Cole's fiancée. She saw Daniel and Robert the moment she stepped into the hall. And she said one word before either of them could speak. No. Miss Levin, Daniel said. We're not here for publicity. She stopped halfway to the stairs. Turned. Her eyes were not afraid. They were tired in the specific way of someone who has been through a door they can't close. That's exactly what people say right before they use you for publicity. He told her what they'd found. The contract. The pattern. The prior projects. Ethan's name at the bottom of the oldest file. He told her about the anonymous message. Phoenix Harbor, Phase 2. Someone died trying to stop the overruns. Rachel's jaw tightened. Ethan was not paranoid, she said, finally. Her voice low and steady. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't a conspiracy person. He believed in systems. In data. If something was wrong, he documented it. That was who he was. When he got hired onto Phoenix Harbor, he was proud, she said. We were talking about buying a house. He thought it meant stability. A future. Her voice caught slightly. Then steadied. And then he changed. At first it was just stress. Long hours. More silence. Then he started saying things. Not crazy things. Frightened things. Daniel held her gaze. What things? That numbers were moving after approval. That invoices didn't match site realities. That material substitutions were being hidden inside emergency variance requests. That shoreline reinforcement budgets were being routed through consultants nobody could explain. She folded her arms. He spent dinner sketching cost trees on napkins because he couldn't figure out where millions of dollars were disappearing. Robert spoke carefully. Did he say Victor Lang's name? Yes. No hesitation. Not at first, she said. At first it was just leadership and finance. Then one night he came home after a meeting and said, "It goes higher than I thought." She looked at Daniel. 2 weeks before he died. Rachel looked down at her hands. He started backing up files. Duplicates. Printed copies. Email drafts to himself. He became careful in a way that scared me. He changed his passwords. Stopped taking calls in the apartment. She swallowed. Once he got up at 2 in the morning because he thought someone had followed him home from the site. Robert's expression tightened. Did he report that? He said there was nothing to report. Just a car too close for too long. She looked at Robert sharply. You have to understand, he hated sounding foolish. So if he told me he was worried, he was already past the point of pretending it was nothing. Did he ever show you the files? Daniel asked. Rachel was quiet. That silence was the hinge. The moment where a door that had been locked for years either opened or stayed shut. She looked at both men. Why should I believe you won't bury this if it gets inconvenient? She asked. You're still Daniel Whitaker. You still have shareholders and boards and lawyers and 1,000 reasons to protect your own name first. It was fair. Maybe the fairest question anyone had asked him in years. Because I already know what it costs, Daniel said, when men like me protect the structure before the truth. He paused. And because if Victor did this to Ethan, then silence would make me part of it. Rachel studied him. Robert added, very quietly, for what it's worth, I'm expensive partly because I don't help clients bury things. Something shifted in her. Not trust, not yet. But the willingness to consider it. There's a storage unit, she said. In Glendale. Ethan rented it 3 days before he died. He told me it was backup in case the system failed. I thought he meant work systems. She looked at the table. I found it 2 weeks after the funeral. A banker's box. A flash drive. Rolled site plans. And a notebook. His handwriting? Daniel asked. His handwriting. She stood. Opened her phone. Tapped twice. I kept the notebook. I left the rest. She looked at both men. If I show you what he wrote, and if I take you to that unit, this stops being a theory. Her eyes were steady. Do you understand that? Yes, Daniel said. And if this becomes leverage instead of truth, if Ethan becomes a tool instead of a person, I walk. That won't happen, Robert said. Rachel nodded once. My apartment is 15 minutes from here, she said. What was inside was precisely what Ethan Cole had promised it would be. Transfer schedules. Invoice batches that didn't match site realities. Routing codes through shell consultancies. An approval chain with Victor Lang's name on it. And a notebook. Daniel read, in Ethan's compressed, careful handwriting. Substitutions hidden under marine delay coding. Emergency budget transfers routed through consultancy clusters. No technical basis. Spoke to Avery, visibly frightened. Said, don't put questions in writing. Same names. Same signatures. Same approvals after objections. This is not sloppiness. It's structure. Daniel turned a page. If anything happens, start with the shoreline variance funds. Compare invoice batches to actual pour schedules. Somebody is washing numbers through delay language. And lower, written more quickly, the handwriting pressing harder. Rachel says I'm not sleeping. She's right. Keep copies off-site. Daniel stopped. Not because he'd reached the end. Because he needed a moment to receive this man as a person again. Not as evidence. Not as a case file. As a man who had been afraid and had documented it carefully and had loved someone named Rachel and had tried, in the only way he knew how, to make sure the truth survived him. He closed the notebook halfway and looked up at Rachel. This is enough to reopen everything, he said. Her face didn't change. It was enough to terrify me. Robert held out a hand. Daniel passed him the notebook. Robert read quickly. His expression, for the first time in 20 years of partnership, showed something close to shock. God, he murmured. Rachel looked at both of them. Don't fail him, she said. Daniel looked at the notebook. The key. The room. The fragile, extraordinary thing he had just been handed. I won't, he said. By 11:30 the next morning, 3 things were in motion. The forensic team had secured digital copies of Ethan's files, with chain of custody preserved. Robert had contacted federal investigators through a channel he had been quietly cultivating for 30 years. And Daniel, over the unanimous objection of every communications advisor in his orbit, had made a decision that no one expected. He was going public. Not defensively. Not as a wounded billionaire trying to save his image. As a witness. He looked out at the cameras. And thought, briefly and vividly, of a little girl in a yellow dress who had told him that mean people only stay powerful when good people stay quiet. He had been quiet long enough. Good morning, he said. The room settled. 2 days ago, this story was framed as a failed business deal. It is no longer that simple. Reporters leaned forward. Since identifying irregularities in the final revisions of our redevelopment contract, my team has uncovered evidence indicating a broader pattern of concealed financial manipulation connected to prior Lang capital projects. This morning, that evidence was provided to the appropriate authorities. Questions erupted. He raised one hand. The room quieted. I want to say something that matters more than market fallout. Complete stillness in the press room. A man named Ethan Cole raised concerns years ago on one of those projects. He documented what he saw. He tried to be heard. He died before that happened. Nobody moved. For too long, people with power have relied on complexity to hide wrongdoing, and on silence to protect the structure around it. He looked directly into the cameras. That ends now. He did not name murder. He did not overstate what the evidence had not yet legally proved. But he named the corruption, the concealment, the pattern, and the human cost. And when questions came, he answered them calmly, without performance, without the anger Victor had been counting on. Tell the truth, calm. The advice of a 6-year-old. Also, as it turned out, excellent litigation strategy. By sunset, the architecture of Victor Lang's 30-year scheme was beginning to come apart. Federal investigators had executed document preservation orders. Lang Capital stock was in free fall. 2 former project consultants had already requested legal representation. Anonymous sources who had once whispered to reporters were now calling them back with names attached. And Ethan Cole's name, which had been buried in a local archive for 6 years, under the words "matter resolved," was everywhere. Rachel Levin watched the coverage from her apartment. She did not celebrate. She sat quietly at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in both hands, watching a screen show the world a man she had loved and a truth she had been carrying alone. She allowed herself to cry. She had earned it. 3 months later, Victor Lang was formally indicted on federal charges of wire fraud, financial concealment, and criminal conspiracy. 2 former associates accepted plea agreements. The Phoenix Harbor project was placed under federal receivership, and the families of affected contractors and workers were notified that an investigation into site safety violations, including the circumstances surrounding Ethan Cole's death, had been reopened. It was not fast. It was not clean. It was not a movie ending where everything resolves in an afternoon. But it was the truth. And the truth, it turned out, had been waiting in a storage unit in Glendale for 6 years, in the careful handwriting of a man who believed that if you documented something faithfully enough, it would eventually survive you. He was right. Daniel called Rachel the day the indictment was announced. She answered on the second ring. Neither of them said much. There wasn't much to say. They stayed on the phone for 4 minutes in something that wasn't quite silence and wasn't quite conversation, just 2 people acknowledging, together, that something had been completed. When he hung up, Daniel sat at his desk for a long time. He thought about the coin in his pocket. He had been carrying it since Atlanta. He didn't know why. Habit, maybe. Or something older than habit. The way people hold on to small objects that remind them of the moment something changed. He thought about a girl in a yellow dress telling him the sadness gets lighter when you take heavy things out of the backpack. He thought about his sister Emily, 30 years ago, telling him every castle needed a door so people could come back home. He thought about Ethan Cole, 34 years old, writing in a black notebook at 2 in the morning, pressing the truth into paper because he had no other weapon. The Whitaker Foundation, established in the months following the indictment, would fund whistleblower protection legal resources for construction and infrastructure workers across 6 states. The first grant went to a legal aid organization in Phoenix. The second went to a scholarship in Ethan Cole's name at the university where he had studied engineering. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. On the corner of Daniel's desk sat a smooth coin. And next to it, a child's drawing. A house. Yellow dress. Red bucket. And in crayon letters at the top, for Daniel, from Amara. The drawing had arrived 3 weeks after Atlanta. A card tucked inside, in a grandmother's handwriting. She wanted you to have a house too. She says everyone should have somewhere to come back to. Nadia. Daniel had framed it. There are people in your life, and maybe you are one of them, who have learned to sit alone with their pain because they decided, somewhere along the way, that asking for help was the same as admitting weakness. Daniel Whitaker built an empire on that belief. It took 6-year-old Amara exactly 4 words to begin dismantling it. Can I sit here? She didn't know about the contract. She didn't know about Victor Lang. She didn't know about Ethan Cole, or the storage unit in Glendale, or the notebook, or the 12-year pattern of elegant fraud that had been hiding in plain sight behind polished smiles and Appendix C. She just knew that the man on the bench was sad. And she knew that that was enough. Here is what this story asks us to carry with us. The people who need kindness the most are often the ones who look like they need it the least. Power is not the same as strength. Grief does not always announce itself. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply refuse to walk past them. Amara didn't save Daniel Whitaker because she had wisdom beyond her years. She saved him because she had wisdom that most of us have but learned to stop trusting. The wisdom that says, this person is hurting, and I am here, and that is enough of a reason to stay. There is an Ethan Cole in every industry. A person who saw something, said something, documented something, and paid a price for it while the people around them looked away. And there is a Daniel Whitaker in every boardroom, not necessarily a villain, but a person who has been so deep inside the structure for so long that they have stopped seeing the human cost of it. What changes them is almost never the crisis. It is the moment someone refuses to walk past. So let me ask you. Who in your life is sitting alone on a bench right now, needing someone to say can I sit here, and waiting to see if you will? And when is the last time you told the truth about something that cost you something? Because here is what Amara knew, and what Daniel learned, and what Ethan Cole spent his last weeks trying to prove. Mean people only stay powerful when good people stay quiet. That is the whole story. And it begins, every time, with 4 words. Can I sit here? If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, or of a version of yourself, or of a truth you've been carrying a little too long alone, please leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you're carrying. We read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe, because we tell stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Stories that remind us what really matters. And share this one. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting on a bench. And they need to know that staying is enough.